When I was very young, I read this verse, which says, "But unto the sons of the concubines which Abraham had, Abraham gave gifts, and sent them away from Isaac his son, while he yet lived eastward unto the east country." And the way this verse is worded, it made it seem like Sarah, Abraham's wife, was just one of many women that he had. And I felt sorry for Sarah. I was very disheartened, and it weakened my faith. And I guess it would be correct to say that I was a little offended by this. Oftentimes people read the Bible and we see things that we don't understand. We may not understand the context, and we're offended. So the purpose of this Bible study is to help you to understand the context of these polygamous relationships. We're not condoning the polygamous relationships, but if you understand the context, it will prevent you from trying to assassinate the character of these men of God. Polygamy is practiced all around the world, but it's hard for us to understand why the men of God would engage in this activity. So I submit to you that we can understand the context. We're never going to completely understand the context because this was a different culture. But if we read the story of Sarah and Abraham, we can understand a little bit about the context, a lot about the context actually of this. Again, not that we're condoning it, but that's one reason for studying this. But another reason is to understand why people in the Middle East, even to this day, still engage in this type of behavior. We can understand why this type of thing may have become prevalent. So the first time in the Bible where a polygamous relationship is mentioned is chapter 4 of Genesis. One of the descendants of Cain actually engaged in polygamy, but the details are not really discussed. So we're going to start with the story of Sarah and Abraham. This is the first time in the Bible where the details of a polygamous relationship were discussed. And not only that, but these are not just random people. These are the men and women of God. So it says, "Now Sarah, Abraham's wife, bare him no children. And she had an handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarah said unto Abraham, Behold now, the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abraham hearkened to the voice of Sarah. And Sarah, Abraham's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abraham had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abraham to be his wife. And he went unto Hagar, and she conceived." Now, there's two things that I want you to consider. Number one, Abraham was not doing this to hurt his wife. He was doing this because his wife commanded him to do it. He was trying to please his wife. The reason that we're not supposed to engage in fornication or adultery or these types of things is because we don't want to hurt our wives. That's the primary reason for it. But it paints a completely different picture on things when you realize that it's the woman who's actually telling her husband to do this. Again, we're not condoning it. We're not saying that this was correct behavior or incorrect behavior. We're not commenting on that at all. That could be a whole nother Bible study about, the context behind what they were doing and whether or not it's appropriate, and you could go on and on about that. We're not condoning it necessarily. We're just saying that the reason it was done was to please Sarah. Now, why did Sarah want to do this? Abraham was not doing it because he was trying to engage in deviant behavior. But why was Sarah doing this? Was she trying to engage in some sort of deviant behavior? Well, no, she was doing it for the production of children. She commanded Abraham to do this because she wanted to have children. So we may not understand the context of all this, but at the very least, we can understand that she had a desire to have children because many of us have this desire also. So when we read this story, we have a tendency to demonize the people who engaged in this. But again, we can't do that to Abraham, and we really can't do that to Sarah either. We may disagree and say, well, there are other options. And, for example, we might say, well, why don't they just adopt? Because that's what we would do in our culture. If you can't have children, normally what you do is adopt. But what if that wasn't possible 4,000 years ago? What if that just wasn't an option? Well, you might say, well, why didn't Sarah just experience child rearing by allowing her handmaid to marry another man? Why didn't she find a husband for her handmaid rather than give her to her husband? Well, again, we don't know the context of this completely, but most likely the reason that Sarah did this was because if Abraham was the father of the child, she would have a lot more control over the rearing of the child. And also because Hagar was Sarah's handmaid, that also gave her a lot of control. And that was the whole point, for Sarah to be able to experience child rearing. So again, it's easy for us to judge, but if you go back to those times, thousands of years ago in that particular culture, you may not know exactly what the context was. So let me give you a hypothetical situation that might help to explain. Again, I want to say over and over and over, we're not condoning the behavior. We're simply trying to understand the context. So let's say that you're stranded on an island with 9 other people. And let's say that these people know that they're never going to get off the island. Somehow they just know that they're going to be there for the rest of their lives. And let's say that there's 1 man and 9 women. So the politically correct thing to do would be for the man to choose 1 woman, and the other 8 women can never have children for the rest of their lives. Well, immediately in that context, we would say, wait a second, that doesn't seem fair. That doesn't seem appropriate. But do you see the point we're making here? We are starkly against polygamy, but in an instant, if you change the context, all of a sudden it becomes plausible. So again, the purpose of this Bible study is not to say go out and practice polygamy. That's not what we're saying. We're simply trying to prevent you from going through the same problem that I went through when I was very young, and I read this, and I saw that a man of God was engaging this behavior. I just didn't understand the context of it. I felt sorry for Sarah that she was one of what seemed to be many wives of Abraham on first read. But on second read, I realized that it doesn't make any sense to feel sorry for Sarah, that she was somehow being abused, because she was the one who actually commanded Abraham to do this. So now let's go to the story of Jacob. Jacob was a man of God. He was Israel. He made up the 12 tribes of Israel, his children. And we learn that Jacob had 4 wives. So how do we explain this? Well, Jacob loved Rachel. Rachel was the woman that he wanted to marry, and she was the love of his life. But she was the younger of 2 daughters that his uncle Laban had. And when it came time for Jacob to marry Rachel, Laban, his uncle, actually tricked him into marrying Leah, the eldest daughter, because it was seen as inappropriate for the younger woman to be married first. Now, at that point, Jacob has 2 wives, and you might say, well, how in the world could he be tricked into marrying Leah? Well, if you read the story, you see that it was actually done on the marriage, on the night of the marriage, and in those days, apparently, they wore veils. In the story of Tamar and Judah, we have another example where apparently they wore veils. And when a man and a woman are married today, oftentimes the woman wears a veil. So that's kind of a remnant of a culture that goes way, way, way back. And I know this is hard for us to understand, but apparently that's what was commonly done. So again, the initial reaction is, well, Jacob is engaging in deviant behavior. That's not appropriate. The knee-jerk reaction is to blame Jacob. It's his fault. He's engaging in this behavior, but it was not his idea to marry Leah. He didn't really want to marry Leah because he loved Rachel. He was tricked into marrying Leah. So if you read the story, Leah has 4 children, but Rachel is not able to have children. So Rachel tells Jacob to take her handmaid, the same thing that Sarah did. It says, when Rachel saw that she bare Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister, and said unto Jacob, give me children, or else I die. And Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, am I in God's stead? Who hath withheld from thee the fruit of the womb? And she said, behold, my maid Bilhah, go in unto her, and she shall bear upon my knees, that I might also have children by her. And she gave him Bilhah her handmaid to wife, and Jacob went unto her, and Bilhah conceived and bare Jacob a son. So Jacob takes a 3rd wife, and he has 2 children from this handmaid. So at this point, he has 3 wives. Now, why did he take Leah? Because he was tricked into taking her. Why did he take the 3rd wife? Because his 2nd wife, whom he loved, commanded him to do this. So again, why do we not engage in adultery, fornication, these types of relationships? Because we don't want to hurt the people in these relationships. But what if the woman is actually the one that is commanding the man to do this? That paints a completely different picture. It doesn't mean that it's just necessarily. It doesn't mean that it's right. It's just that we can prevent ourselves from being offended or disheartened because the people of God are engaging in this behavior. So Leah, at that point, realizes that she is not having children anymore. So she does the same thing that Rachel does. She takes her handmaiden and gives the woman to Jacob. And the purpose is to produce more children. So Jacob has 2 more children by Leah's handmaid. So at this point, he has 4 wives. Now, why did Jacob take this 3rd wife? Was it to hurt Rachel? No, it was to please Rachel. Why did Jacob take a 4th wife? Was it to hurt Leah? No, it was to please Leah. So that's the Bible study for today. We're not condoning this behavior, but this helps us to understand why polygamy is considered acceptable in certain cultures. Although we don't condone this behavior, we can see that under certain circumstances, people may have been prone to do this, but it wasn't necessarily the man's, he wasn't the primary motivation in every single one of these cases. Now, there are examples in the Bible where it's obvious that it's not really necessary. For example, Solomon had 1,000 wives. Well, you can't say that that's really necessary. Obviously, he was doing it just for companionship. There were many examples in the Bible, so we're not saying that all of them or any of them really are just. The purpose of this is to understand the context of the culture and to prevent us from demonizing these men of God.